Have you ever felt deeply connected to someone yet somehow distant from them at the very same time? Have you ever found yourself wondering why someone who clearly has feelings for you suddenly withdraws, goes quiet, becomes almost impossible to reach? One moment they are warm, engaged, fully present, and then the next they retreat like a window slowly shutting. No words of explanation, no obvious reason, just space. And that space can make you question absolutely everything. You begin asking yourself painful questions. Was it something I did? Have their feelings faded? Were they ever truly invested in this to begin with? Because in most relationships, love appears straightforward. When someone loves you, they reach out. They want closeness. They share what is on their mind. They let you into their heart. But when you are with someone who has an avoidant nature, love does not always present itself that way. In fact, it sometimes looks like the complete opposite. They disappear for stretches of time. They become emotionally withdrawn. They build invisible space between themselves and you. And to someone unfamiliar with avoidant psychology, this kind of behavior feels like being pushed away. It feels like they are gradually walking out of your life. But here is something most people never stop to consider. Sometimes the very behaviors that leave you most confused are actually signals that they care deeply. Yes, the silence, the withdrawal, the hesitation. These things are not always evidence that love is absent. Sometimes they are evidence that love feels like too much to carry. Human psychology is layered and complex, especially when it comes to how people attach to one another. Not everyone was shown how to handle emotional closeness. Not everyone grew up in an environment where connection felt safe. Some people absorbed a very different lesson very early in their lives. They learned that depending on others is a form of weakness. They learned that opening their heart creates openings for pain. They learned that being vulnerable can rob them of their sense of security. So rather than moving toward intimacy, their mind was trained to move away from it. Not because they do not desire love, but because love activates a deep protective instinct within them. This is what psychologists refer to as an avoidant attachment style. And when someone with this attachment pattern begins developing genuine feelings for another person, something remarkable and conflicted begins to happen internally. Two powerful forces begin pulling in opposite directions within their mind. One part of them longs for connection, for closeness, for remaining near you, but another part becomes frightened of surrendering control, of needing someone too intensely, of becoming emotionally exposed and raw. And when that fear reaches a certain intensity, their natural instinct pushes them to create distance. Not because their feelings have disappeared, but because their inner defense system is working to shield them. This is precisely why avoidant behavior is so widely misunderstood. People observe the distance and conclude there is no love. They hear the silence and assume there is no interest. They notice the hesitation and decide the connection is meaningless. But the truth is frequently the complete opposite. Sometimes the reason an avoidant person becomes withdrawn is because their feelings are deepening beyond what they anticipated. And deep feelings can feel absolutely terrifying to someone who spent years constructing emotional barriers. Consider it this way. If someone has spent their entire existence guarding their heart, learning to rely solely on themselves, keeping their emotions sealed behind invisible walls, then suddenly encountering someone who begins dismantling those walls can feel destabilizing. It feels foreign, unsteady, unpredictable. Their mind begins generating dangerous questions. What happens if I get wounded by this? What if I lose my sense of self in this relationship? What if I start needing them and they are not there? And when these questions begin echoing loudly inside them, their initial response is not to move closer. Their initial response is self-protection. So they pull back. They grow quieter, more guarded, more cautious. Not because you are unimportant, but because you have become more important than they know how to manage. And this is the breaking point for many relationships. Because the person on the receiving end does not understand what is truly unfolding beneath the surface. They see only the distance. They feel only the confusion. And confusion breeds insecurity. Insecurity breeds doubt. And doubt begins eroding something that may have been genuinely real. But when you truly understand the psychology driving avoidant behavior, everything begins shifting. Suddenly, those baffling actions start making a kind of sense. You begin noticing patterns that most people overlook: small behaviors, quiet signals, understated choices that expose what they genuinely feel, because avoidant individuals rarely communicate love through sweeping declarations. They communicate it through behavior, through moments, through actions that are simple to miss unless you know precisely what you are observing. And that is exactly what we are going to explore throughout this video. By the time we reach the end, you will understand the hidden language of avoidant affection. You will uncover the subtle indicators that reveal when an avoidant person truly has feelings for you, signals that most people misread and sometimes overlook entirely. And once you recognize these signals, something meaningful shifts. The confusion begins to lift. The behavior that once seemed like rejection begins telling an entirely different story. A story about fear, about emotional fortresses, and sometimes about a love that runs far deeper than it initially appears. So if you have ever felt disoriented by someone who seems warm in one moment and unreachable in the next, stay with this until the very end. Why does someone pull away precisely when the emotional bond begins feeling genuine? This is the moment that leaves most people bewildered. The moment when feelings are clearly growing stronger, yet the other person becomes increasingly difficult to access. Messages shrink in length. Conversations feel less substantial. The warmth that once flowed naturally begins dissolving into distance. For many people, this moment signals the beginning of something ending. But inside the mind of an avoidant person, something very different is unfolding. When emotional closeness begins deepening, their internal alarm system quietly activates. It does not switch on because they have lost interest in the relationship. It activates because their mind has learned to associate deep connection with vulnerability. And vulnerability registers as a threat. Human psychology is fundamentally organized around safety. The brain continuously scans its environment for possible emotional dangers. When someone with avoidant tendencies begins feeling profoundly bonded to another person, their brain interprets that closeness as something carrying the potential to wound them later. It is not a conscious decision. It is not a strategy. It is automatic. Their mind delivers one clear message: protect yourself. So instead of leaning further into the bond, they instinctively generate emotional space, not as punishment, not as a form of manipulation, but as armor. To someone observing from the outside, this reaction can appear cold or inexplicable. It may look as though the person suddenly lost all interest, but what is genuinely happening within them is a quiet internal battle between two opposing poles. One side craves connection, the other side craves independence. One side feels drawn toward emotional bonding, the other side fears dissolving into it and losing themselves. These two forces press against each other like currents flowing in opposite directions. As the desire for closeness intensifies, the fear of emotional exposure rises alongside it, and when that fear becomes sufficiently overwhelming, their instinct tells them to decelerate everything. They may respond less often. They may sidestep emotionally heavy conversations. They may redirect attention toward practical or surface-level subjects rather than matters of feeling. This behavior can feel utterly baffling to someone who expresses affection freely and naturally. But for an avoidant person, emotions can feel suffocating when they grow too powerful. Imagine carrying a heavy emotional pack across many years. Inside it live past disappointments, experiences of betrayal, memories of moments when trust led somewhere painful. Over time, the mind learns to keep that pack firmly sealed. Then unexpectedly, a new person enters the picture, someone who creates a sense of being understood, someone who brings warmth into spaces that have remained guarded for a very long time. That experience can feel extraordinary, but also alarming, because unsealing the pack means revealing dimensions of themselves they have spent years concealing. So rather than opening it entirely, they take small steps backward. Distance becomes a tool for recovering emotional equilibrium. In their internal experience, creating space allows them to breathe again. What most people fail to recognize is that this retreat typically emerges at precisely the moment the connection is beginning to carry real significance. That is why avoidant behavior generates so much confusion. The closer you begin to feel, the more cautious they appear. But this pattern is not coincidental. It mirrors what psychologists have observed consistently in attachment research. When closeness surpasses a threshold that feels tolerable, the avoidant mind seeks relief by reclaiming a sense of personal autonomy. They may absorb themselves in professional responsibilities, personal interests, or solitude. These outlets help them reestablish a feeling of control over their internal world. From the outside, this appears to be emotional disengagement, yet internally, they are processing feelings that have grown more powerful than they were prepared for. Their inner dialogue might sound something like this: "This is moving too quickly. I need to step back and think. I cannot afford to lose myself here." These thoughts are not evidence that the bond is hollow. They are evidence that the bond is affecting them more profoundly than they expected. People who are naturally at ease with emotional intimacy tend to move toward connection when feelings intensify. Avoidant individuals sometimes move away temporarily so they can process those same feelings at a pace they can manage. Recognizing this distinction transforms how their actions are interpreted. Rather than perceiving only coldness, it becomes possible to recognize the internal tension living beneath the surface. Someone who feels nothing simply leaves. They do not experience inner conflict. They do not require time to process emotional weight. The struggle itself is proof that something meaningful is being stirred within them, and genuine growth frequently begins at exactly that threshold. When someone whose natural inclination is to protect their independence begins genuinely caring for another person, their entire emotional architecture must recalibrate. That recalibration can look disorganized, it can look slow, it can look unclear, but it is part of the process. Real emotional evolution rarely travels a straight path. There are moments of nearness, then moments of stepping back, then movement forward again. Understanding this rhythm allows a steadier interpretation of avoidant behavior. Rather than responding immediately with alarm or frustration, it becomes possible to observe the cycle with greater calm. The quiet truth is that avoidant individuals do experience intense emotions. They simply process and express those emotions differently. Their language of love is understated. It surfaces through behavior rather than through grand verbal declarations. And once that language becomes recognizable, small details begin revealing something significant. Certain actions repeat themselves. Quiet signals emerge, showing that the connection still holds weight for them even when emotional intensity becomes difficult to navigate. These subtle behaviors are frequently overlooked, yet they carry substantial meaning, and learning to read them is the key to understanding when an avoidant person genuinely cares. Once the pattern becomes more legible, small behaviors begin to stand apart. They are quiet behaviors. They are not theatrical, yet they carry a weight that most people walk past without noticing. When an avoidant person develops genuine affection for someone, their feelings most often surface through subtle choices rather than visible emotional displays. One of the earliest signals lives in the way they return. Even after creating distance, they come back. The gap may span hours, days, or occasionally longer, but they reconnect. This return is significant. It demonstrates that despite their need for space, the bond has remained alive in their thoughts. Someone who feels nothing simply fades. They do not circle back. But when an avoidant person keeps reappearing in your life, it signals that the connection still carries value for them. Another meaningful sign reveals itself in their attention to detail. They may not openly verbalize their feelings, yet they recall small things you have shared. Perhaps something you mentioned weeks ago, a passion of yours, a difficulty you described only in passing. Those details remain stored within them. This kind of attentiveness reveals that they are listening more closely than their quiet exterior suggests. Their mind holds pieces of your world, even when they rarely reference them aloud. There are also moments when they unexpectedly check in on how you are doing. The message may be brief. The tone might read as casual. Yet the intention behind it holds weight. A short note, a quick question about your day, or a considerate comment during a challenging period can expose genuine care. These gestures may appear routine on the surface, but for someone who struggles with emotional openness, reaching out in this way requires real effort. Consistency is another quiet indicator. Avoidant individuals typically guard their independence with great determination, yet when they genuinely value someone, they sustain a presence in that person's life. They may not communicate at high frequency, but they remain a steady feature of your world. They keep showing up across time. This enduring pattern demonstrates that the connection carries importance well beyond fleeting interest. Occasionally, there are brief windows when their defenses lower. In those rare moments, they disclose something personal. It might be a memory from their earlier years, a fear they normally conceal, a thought they seldom voice. These glimpses may appear minor, but they demand courage. For someone who habitually shields their private world, allowing another person to see even a fragment of it is genuinely significant. Another behavior surfaces in how they offer support in indirect ways. Rather than emotional speeches, they may show up practically. They solve a problem, offer grounded advice, or step in when life grows difficult. This approach lets them express care without exposing too much of their emotional interior at once. Their support functions as a quiet form of devotion. At times, they also initiate shared experiences, suggesting an activity, extending an invitation, or nurturing rituals that belong only to the two of you. These moments create connection in a format that feels manageable for them. Rather than emotionally heavy conversations, they prefer actions that organically draw people closer together. There is also a signal concealed in their willingness to remain present when things become complicated. When friction arises, many avoidant individuals instinctively choose withdrawal. Yet if they return afterward to work through the tension, it speaks to commitment. It reveals that they value the relationship enough to endure discomfort rather than permanently walking away. Another indicator appears through loyalty. Despite their fierce protection of personal freedom, they do not readily replace meaningful bonds. If they continue choosing to remain in your life across time, it reflects a deeper attachment quietly forming beneath the surface. Taken individually, these behaviors may seem unremarkable, but observed together, a pattern forms. That pattern reveals someone who cares, but who expresses it differently from what most people expect. The reality is that avoidant individuals frequently communicate love through actions that feel emotionally safe to them. They may not speak in sweeping romantic terms. They may not consistently display intense emotion. Yet their behavior conveys a steady presence that deepens gradually alongside growing trust. Recognizing these signals requires patience. It requires paying attention to actions rather than anchoring expectations solely to words. When observation shifts toward behavior, the meaning encoded in their choices becomes far easier to decode. Every small step matters. Each return after distance, each remembered detail, each moment of quiet assistance, all of it reflects effort. And effort is frequently the most transparent evidence of genuine feeling. Over time, these patterns compose a richer picture. They portray someone learning how to remain connected while simultaneously managing internal hesitation. The journey is not always smooth. It involves uncertainty, reflection, and incremental emotional progress. But when someone who ordinarily defends their independence keeps choosing the same person again and again, it carries profound meaning. It means the connection has grown powerful enough to challenge the very walls they built to protect themselves. And when that happens, something important begins shifting within them. When these patterns persist across time, something deeper begins taking root inside an avoidant person. What once felt overwhelming gradually begins feeling more familiar. The emotional walls constructed for protection do not vanish overnight, but they begin adjusting, brick by quiet brick. Change does not arrive through sudden revelation. It grows through repeated encounters with safety. Trust is the central element in this transformation. For someone who spent years sealing their inner world from others, trust is never handed over easily. It must be cultivated through consistency, patience, and emotional reliability. Every experience of calm understanding, rather than pressure, teaches their mind something new about what connection can be. The human brain reshapes itself through lived experience. When a person repeatedly discovers that closeness does not lead to harm, their protective instincts gradually soften. What once registered as threatening becomes increasingly manageable. Their nervous system slowly learns that emotional connection does not require surrendering autonomy. This gradual evolution produces a quiet but powerful shift. The same individual who once retreated whenever emotions surged begins permitting a little more closeness. They begin sharing thoughts with greater ease. Their replies carry more warmth. Their presence feels more anchored. These changes may appear modest at first, but they carry deep significance. Emotional development rarely arrives in dramatic breakthroughs. It arrives through small steps repeated consistently over extended periods. Each positive interaction deposits new proof that connection can exist without devastation. The mind catalogs these moments like quiet evidence. With each experience of safety, fear surrenders a portion of its grip. This is precisely why patience holds such weight in relationships where avoidant tendencies are present. When someone attempts to accelerate emotional intimacy, the protective mechanism reactivates swiftly. Pressure generates resistance. Urgency triggers the escape instinct. But when the atmosphere feels calm and genuinely understanding, a different response emerges. Rather than retreating, they begin moving closer in ways that feel bearable for them. This is how secure attachment gradually takes root. It develops when someone encounters consistent emotional safety over a sustained period. Slowly, they absorb a new understanding that relationships are not inevitably painful. Their internal map of connection begins redrawing itself. Closeness, once perceived as a risk, begins appearing as something steady and sustaining. During this phase, their behavior reveals expanding emotional investment. They become more willing to let you into different areas of their life. Conversations develop greater depth. Time spent together carries more intention. Another sign of this internal shift appears in how they navigate vulnerability. What once created intense discomfort begins feeling more accessible. Sharing personal thoughts produces less anxiety than before. They may begin expressing appreciation in quiet ways. They might acknowledge how meaningful your presence has become. At times, they reflect openly on the relationship itself. These expressions may still feel measured and careful, yet they represent real forward movement. Emotional progress also reshapes their response during difficult moments. Where conflict once triggered immediate withdrawal, they now linger longer. They may still need space to process, but they return to engage with the difficulty. This capacity to remain present during tension rather than abandoning the connection reflects growing emotional maturity. It signals that the relationship has become something worth protecting rather than something to escape. With time, something genuinely powerful takes hold. The fear that once governed their reactions begins losing its authority. A new sense of internal steadiness emerges in its place. They come to understand that closeness does not erase who they are. They discover that caring deeply for someone does not mean disappearing into them. This realization can be profoundly life-altering. It rewires how they relate to love entirely. Rather than defending themselves against every emotional risk, they begin allowing love to coexist with their independence. Both needs discover equilibrium, and this transformation does not only strengthen the relationship, it expands who they are as a person. They grow more fluent in their own emotional language. They learn to express their needs with greater clarity. Through all of this, the connection matures into something far more solid than the early stages ever hinted at. What once felt uncertain becomes reliable. What once felt impossible to decode becomes legible. The journey from withdrawal to genuine closeness teaches a profound lesson about human nature. People express love in forms shaped by everything they have lived through. Some do it loudly and without hesitation. Others do it quietly through commitment and gradual presence. Neither form is less authentic. They are simply different routes carved by different histories. When someone who once feared emotional closeness begins allowing another person access to their inner world, it takes extraordinary courage. It means they are actively rewriting patterns that have governed them for years. And when that kind of growth becomes visible, it reveals something powerful about the bond they share. It reveals that the relationship became significant enough to inspire genuine change. Because deep emotional transformation rarely happens without a compelling reason. And when someone who once guarded their heart so fiercely begins opening it, that reason is almost always the presence of someone who finally made them feel safe enough to try.